right, boys and girls, the moment that you've all been waiting for. We are now at episode number 7 for Velma. It's something that I still wonder how we're able to even make it through this nonsense. And this particular episode, guys, you're going to want to stick around for this one because this episode is unbelievably bad. Now, I know a lot of the previous episodes were really terrible, but this one in particular, you're really going to like because the entire episode, especially from the middle to the end, spends literally no time doing anything else other than blaming men and shitting on men and making them feeling like they are the cause for all problems. This episode is going to be phrased as the anti-man episode. I phrase every episode as something. This episode is literally the anti-man episode. You're going to see as we watch just how crazy it is, guys. So before we get into the review, guys, of course, I always have to say, consider helping me out by giving me a long view duration on this video. It helps us fight the YouTube algorithm. Even if it gets too cringy for you to watch, just leave it running in the background with the sound off. I don't really care. Just help us with a long view duration. And don't forget to give the video a like because it helps get the video out there. And not only that, guys, at the end of this video, like all my other ones, I'm going to give this particular episode a score. So stick around to the end so you can see what score I give this episode. Now, with that being said, let's finally get into episode number 7 for Velma. So the episode starts off with the obvious notion that Velma is now able to not have hallucinations anymore. She got rid of her hallucinations in the last episode because her father now finally believes her about her mother, because clearly that's all it takes to get over panic attacks. I mean, this show is pretty like ridiculous. So now she's going to completely focus on finding her mother. That's become the focal point. And the weird thing is, like, this is running alongside the whole murder mystery, which just became relevant again in the last episode. Up until the last episode, the murder mystery just didn't even it wasn't even a thing. It was barely mentioned. Nobody really even cared aside from the first episode. And even then, it kind of took a backseat. Finding Velma's mother is the most important thing to Velma. She doesn't really care about the actual murder mystery. She might mention it every now and then, but she really just wants to solve the mystery of why her mom left. Now, the one thing I noticed in this episode is that it was revealed, and I don't know if they actually did this beforehand. It was revealed that Velma's mother actually wrote mystery stories, which I find interesting that they didn't. I don't think they mentioned this, and if they did, I'm sorry I missed it. I've been so just completely out of it. But she was going through her old mysteries that her mother wrote, and when she was going through it, she realized, because she's trying to figure out, like, what's the meaning behind the word Jinkies. She can't quite figure it out, because on the last episode, Jinkies was left on a piece of paper that was written in her mother's handwriting, so she doesn't exactly know what Jinkies means, so she tries to go and find different things that has Jinkies in it, like this random license plate, for example, or like Jinkies the Clown on the internet, for example. She goes through it and looks through a bunch of things, and she can't seem to find it. And then all of a sudden, she ends up getting a phone call from Daphne that she ignores. And then when Velma ends up going back home, Daphne cuts her off and says that she needs to talk to her. Velma essentially blows off Daphne, goes inside the house, and finds her stepmom has been murdered on the floor. Now, my animation is cutting off what actually happened. But the thing is, I kind of knew this was not real, only because the killer is going for girls with their brains, right? So a lot of the cuts and a lot of the bleeding would happen from the actual brain. This one's in the neck. So I kind of had a feeling this was fake, but obviously Velma finds her, and then when she walks towards her, she realizes that it's actually not real. Her father jumps in there. She says, "Oh my God, she's dead." Obviously, they make a whole joke out of it because that's just what they do. And then the killer wrote something on the wall, and it says, "Aman, will you go to the Crystal Cove Fog Festival with me?" You come to find out that it's actually just a kind of like proposal from the stepmom, and that she did it with fake blood. You guys can see it now on the screen. It's really stupid, honestly. I really thought they should have just kept her dead. I felt like that would have made it more interesting. But of course, they have to make a lot of things into a joke. So they turn it into this whole big joke, and then they talk about the Fog Festival and how Velma's making a little bit of notions towards what I feel is like references to the lockdowns kind of a thing. I don't know if that's just me watching the episode, but she mentions the fact that people should not be leaving when there's danger outside, that everybody should be staying home until the danger has been cleared. Obviously, she's referencing the serial killer in this TV show, but I just can't help but feel she might be like referencing real life lockdowns. I don't really know. She calls people crazy for wanting to leave their house when there's danger outside. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, that obviously makes no sense. And if you think of it from a pandemic standpoint, then it starts to make you wonder what's really happening here. But, I digress. She's obviously talking about the murders. She was asking what happened to the curfew. The curfew has been taken away because people just don't want to stay in their house anymore. Then they end up reading the newspaper and they realize that the story has been released about Dr. Edna Perdue. And she was wondering who released the information to the newspaper source because it was only them who knew about it. They talk about going to the Fog Fest. And then when they talk about the Fog Fest, they mentioned that no girl is allowed to go to the Fog Fest without a date. So Velma takes her first opportunity out of many in this episode. And I'm telling you, there is many in this episode that they attack men. It's going to be crazy. Just stick around. You're gonna either laugh your ass off or get pissed, one of the two. But she ends up saying that it's extremely sexist for them to have a date in order for them to go to the Fog Fest. Now, they don't necessarily say that you have to be dating a man in order to go. They just say you have to have a date. So Velma can just go date a girl if she wants to. But she calls it extremely sexist and makes it into this whole big thing. Check this out.
Have to have a date? Great. So Fogfest is not only dangerous, it's sexist too.
So yeah, honestly, it's just one of those things, man. It's one of those things. Everybody in town thinks the killer is a ghost, so that's why they feel safe, because obviously nobody believes in ghosts in this town. But they think it's a ghost, so they think they can't get actually physically harmed anymore. But obviously that's not true. Fred ends up being absolutely obsessed with winning Fog King and Queen. It's basically like a prom event, right? So he's trying to win Fog King and Queen, and he wants Velma to be his queen for whatever odd reason, because he's still a feminist. And at the end of the day, he read that feminism book and he's all for it. His parents do not want him to be with Velma. He thinks that if he goes with Velma, he's not going to win Fog King and Queen. And his father says that if he doesn't win, to not even come back home, that he's basically not allowed back in the house anymore. The mom also basically grills him for the same exact way. Fred makes a joke about being attracted to nerds, of which the parents say there's nothing wrong with liking intelligent women, but that Velma's essentially just ugly. And she says if they don't win Fog King and Queen, then they're going to look like assholes, and they don't want to look like assholes. So they basically threaten them and say, do not come home at all if you do not win. Fast forward to the high school, and now we have Gigi, who is talking to one of the pretty girls. I forgot her name. I have no idea what her name is. But she's basically saying how Norville's a terrible boyfriend because he was not around for Gigi when she got stung by multiple bees, and she almost died. But she still ends up having a soft spot for Norville. And then Velma ends up coming and tries to convince him not to. Look at this picture, by the way. I could just see Mindy Kaling him like 100%. She tries to convince him not to go to Fogfest because obviously the serial killer is still around and it's not safe, but everybody says they're going to do so no matter what. Norville is hiding in her locker and comes out as a jump scare that you think is actually one of the hallucinations, but it's not. It's a jump scare from Norville. Norville ends up asking Gigi to go to Fogfest. She obviously tries to fight it off at first, but she ends up giving in and saying, yes, of course she's going to go because she obviously is obsessed with Norville. So Norville starts uploading it to his blog about the date, and then Velma comes in and questions Norville again about why is he going to Fogfest. There's a bunch of reasons why Velma is obviously mad, one of which doesn't have to do with safety at all. It has to do with the fact that he's taking Gigi, but it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, well, Velma, you kind of deserve that. So Norville tells Velma that he needs Fogfest, and he thinks that she needs Fogfest too to get out and try to take her mind off of all the craziness that's going on. And they do a little bit of a backstory about the fog and how the fog in Crystal Cove is really creepy, and it has like magical properties, and you can walk in one section, come out completely opposite side, one of those things. And they showcase when Daphne and Velma first met on the beach. He keeps trying to convince her to go. She doesn't want to go. And then we get to the point of Daphne, Velma, and Fred eating lunch. Velma and Daphne have a little bit of a moment here, and Fred seems like he's getting in the way. And then ends up asking out Daphne to go be his Fog Queen because he thinks since Daphne's so hot that he's going to have an easy win with Daphne, which, to spite Velma, Daphne says that she will happily go with Fred because obviously, Velma and Daphne are having this thing where they're constantly in a fight with each other. So Velma goes back to trying to discover who the serial killer is, but we all know it has nothing to do with that. She just wants to find her mom. Velma calls Daphne, and Daphne's ignoring the call, even though Velma can clearly see Daphne is ignoring the call as she walks by the house. And while Velma is using her mother's manuscripts from her stories to kill spiders, she realizes something in the stories, the fact that the story is called Detective Jinkies, The Case of the Invisible Ink. So it's interesting. This I'll give them, it's interesting because it says Detective Jinkies, The Case of the Invisible Ink. Velma gets the idea that invisible ink might be used on that paper that she left Jinkies on. And when she puts the paper to a light, it comes up with a phone number. So that's a cool little clue. I will admit, I do like it, and it's sad because I feel like if they weren't so stupid with their constant identity politics, and if they weren't so badgering with their messaging, that this whole mystery thing could have actually been pretty decent and pretty interesting and fun to watch. But unfortunately, all that other stuff takes away from it. It really ruins the show for a lot of people, including myself. So Velma ends up calling that number, and it's nothing but heavy breathing on the other line, and Velma assumes that it's a serial killer, and she's listening to the background noise that the serial killer is by, because he's obviously on the cell phone. And then when she listens, she realizes that all those sounds tie back to the Fogfest festival. So now she realizes that the serial killer is at Fogfest. So she makes up this whole big grand plan to go to Fogfest, because she obviously can't go because she doesn't have a date. So what's her big plan? Okay, Velma decides she wants to be a trans. she decides to become a man. That's half the comedy in this show. She literally decides she wants to become a man. Now this is when all the mask comes off. After becoming a man, Velma literally makes a man joke every like 5 minutes in the remainder of the episode. I'm telling you, it's ridiculous how many jokes she says about men. I'm going to try to cover them all, but I might miss some because there are literally so many. So she ends up putting on a mustache because clearly that's all it takes to become a man in the eyes of their, in the eyes of their ideology. And she slicks back their hair, and now she's a man. She calls herself Manny because Manny, very simple-minded people. And then she makes a joke and says, as you can tell by my mustache, I am a male human. It's ironic that these people really think that that's all it takes to become a man, or vice versa, certain things that's all it takes to become a woman. It's literally man face and woman face nonstop, but this is where we're at right now. So she ends up trying to sneak in, and then when she tries to sneak in, the sheriff notices her and says, you look awfully familiar, and says to prove that she's a man, of which she decides to smack his balls to prove that she's a man. And the sheriff says, okay, only men do that, so clearly you're a man. It's really weird. I don't really understand that. So she's trying to see where the serial killer is at the entire time. She can't really find him. Before that, I actually missed something. So if you go back, the woman cops, they say something about mansplaining. Check this out.
Mustache. I am a male human and not at all related to Velma Dinkley.
Okay, sir. I don't need you mansplaining who you are to me.
That's the first one, mansplaining. Of course, we got to talk about mansplaining. It's so stupid. All right, so let's fast forward where we have Norville and Gigi, but Gigi feels like Norville is ignoring her completely and is not having a good time. Norville ends up pissing her off multiple times in this episode, and he can't seem to shake the fact that he is obsessed with Velma. She knows that he's obsessed with Velma. He accidentally mentions Velma's name multiple times, but she's just trying to enjoy herself, but she really can't seem to do so. Daphne is a super drunk because, of course, that's something we got to show, underage girls being super drunks. She's drinking nonstop over there because she's completely depressed about her parents, about what happened in the other episode. And then Fred ends up coming down and trying to convince people to vote for him for king, and he's throwing tons of money at them in order to vote for him for king. Check this out.
Hey guys, I'm Fred Jones. Vote for me for Fog King, or I will make it my life's work to destroy you. What?
It's really sad. They continue to beat down Fred, even though at this point it should be an old joke, but they just keep doing so. So we keep going fast forward. Velma cannot find the serial killer still, and then Daphne ends up recognizing Velma, or AKA Manny, at this point, and thinking that he is a tasty snack. So Daphne ends up being obsessed with Manny because she's obviously drunk and just looking for an easy time. And then this is where we get the first look at the serial killer, although I think this is a second serial killer, to be honest with you. They all wear that same mask, but this one looks a lot smaller and more feminine, whereas the first one from the last episode looked way bigger. Definitely bigger, so I don't really know what to make of this. I still think it's a two-killer thing. I've been saying that since the beginning. I think it's a two-killer mystery, but we're going to find out as time goes on. Velma ends up getting hit on by a couple of girls at the party, where she ends up making more man jokes. Check this out.
But I'm having a bad night.
We're not disgusted. We're impressed. Can you teach me how to unhinge my jaw like that? I want to join a sorority.
So I'm sure you guys caught on what she meant by unhinge her jaw so she can join a sorority. Obviously, it's a reference to, hazing kind of a thing. But yeah, so Velma is apparently the most attractive man there, and now she says this about a double standard. Check this out.
Impressed? But that's such a double standard. Every day at lunch, you're like, hey, mayonnaise isn't soup.
We've never met before, but I'm Olive. As in, Olive to party.
Yeah, the jokes are really bad. The jokes are really, 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 really bad. So Fogfest ends up happening, and Fred and Norville both end up fighting on the dance floor, and because Norville really wants to win Fog King, and he wants to basically impress Gigi, but Gigi's just completely over it and calling him stupid for wanting to fight. She ends up walking away. Norville doesn't care at first because he's too focused trying to fight Fred. And now we have yet another man joke from Velma. Check this out.
That was amazing. Guys put zero pressure on you to wash your hands. Even though I didn't catch the serial killer, at least tonight's not a total loss.
So in her eyes, and you'll see further in the episode, in her eyes, being a man is the easiest thing in the world. That's how a lot of these feminists think. They think that being a man is the easiest thing in the world. There is no difficulty to being a man. Being a woman is the hardest thing on the planet. And that's how they genuinely feel. But of course, it wasn't the serial killer. It was Daphne that pulled Manny through the cloud, saying that she reminds of a friend Velma. They have a little bit of a moment and then decide to end up going dancing, where we hear this.
God, Manny, it's so cute when guys pretend dancing is lame and half-ass it.
You don't find it annoying? You've clearly studied dance for years, and yet any bozo can take over a dance floor just by doing the work.
So again, it's downplaying men every chance they get. This is the entire point of this episode. And now she makes another joke about the worm and how it's just easy for men. Check this out.
Wait a second. As a guy, everyone thinks my worst qualities as a girl are awesome.
You see what I'm saying? So they again, they're trying to make it seem like for men, it's so easy. For women, it's so hard. And it's just one of those typical feminist talking points. So because Velma thinks that men have easy automatic authority just for being a man, she decides to want to go up on stage and try to convince the crowd to go back home and not stick around because the serial killer is still at large. And everybody ends up believing her simply because she's a man now. Even her father says it. Check this out.
I want a party, but curfew cannot end because the serial killer is still on the loose.
That's what my daughter's been saying. But for some reason, I believe it more from you.
You see what I mean? It's because she's presenting as a man that all of a sudden what she's saying matters. That's the story that they're trying to push with this whole stupid nonsense. So fast forward, Norville is still trying to convince Gigi he's not doing it for anything other than themselves. But she's just completely pissed at him and she's not having it. And then this is when Velma has the realization that she can do anything simply because she's a man. Check this out.
Wonder men are so desperate to hold onto their power. This is the easiest shit ever. As a guy, I can do anything.
And to reiterate what she said, now they go forward and they show Velma in multiple different scenarios as a man and how unbelievably easy it is. Now, all of a sudden, she's funny as a comedian because she's a man, right? And then if we go forward, all of a sudden she comes in half-dressed, completely lazy, completely like not shaved, all this stuff, which by the way never happens, okay? Men end up going dressed very well to interviews, so I don't know why they're trying to portray like this is a thing. But of course, they're trying to portray like, look, you have a girl with a nice long typed out resume, and then you have a guy who just says, resume, I'm awesome, and then he gets hired because he's a man. It's just what they want you to truly believe. Not only that, you have a woman who painted an amazing painting, clearly, amazing painting, and then you have Velma, who literally just put her butt cheeks on there, and then that painting was picked #1, and now she's the best artist ever because she is a man. It's the same freaking story that gets told over and over and over again by all feminists. But anyway, fast forward, and now you got Fred's parents who are pissed at him and tell him not to come home because he lost. Obviously, Velma as Manny is just living the high life. Daphne approaches him. They have a little bit of a moment where Velma realizes how drunk Daphne is, and then Daphne ends up spilling the beans about why she's so drunk and what she's been feeling lately. They almost have a moment, and then it's cut by Fred, who realizes that Manny is actually Velma. And once it's discovered, Daphne gets extremely pissed because she has let Velma hurt her again, which she swore she would never do. And then Fred's parents end up announcing King and Queen, who end up, in fact, being Norville and Gigi. So Fred ends up losing, Norville ends up winning, but Gigi's nowhere to be found. She's been missing. They start to notice she's been missing, and they go looking for her. Gigi ends up walking around in a carriage, and then this happens. Gigi ends up getting abducted, at least that's how it looks, and then Velma ends up finding Daphne on the beach, and then it says this.
Consequence for your actions. I was like, I'd be an idiot not to at least try and go for it. Baba Booey!
She says that guys literally have no consequences for their actions. I mean, this entire episode is a man-hating episode. That's all this episode is. This episode screams, I hate men. I'm angry. I don't get men. That's all it is, man. That's all it is. So she says she's a bad friend. She's been selfish. They try to make up, and then all of a sudden the serial killer shows himself. But again, this serial killer is much smaller than the last one. Now that I look at it, it doesn't really look too feminine. But then again, it could be hiding with chest binding stuff. You never really know these days. But it's a much smaller serial killer than the last one. So I think there's definitely two of them. And then Norval's looking for Gigi with the crown. The serial killer almost gets Velma, but then the knife ends up getting switched out for something else. Fred and Norval has his entire door chasing thing, very similar to old school Scooby-Doo. Serial killer corners all four of them, and it gets to a point where it looks like they're about to be killed, but then the serial killer completely disappears into the fog, but ends up leaving his phone on top of Fred's head. So Velma's going to try to use the phone to find the serial killer, and then they turn around and they realize that Gigi is actually right there the entire time. They make up, and after they make up, everything is good from there between Norval and Gigi, and they become Fog King and Queen. Fred ends up stealing the crown because he wants to go back home and prove that he won, or has a crown, because that's the only way he can go back home. Daphne and Velma share a little bit of a moment, saying that after she's done, she's going to come back to Daphne and focus on her only. And that's how the episode ends. It's literally a super man-hating episode, the likes of which is only possible with a show like Velma, created by Mindy Kaling. And then the final cutscene at the end is Fred going into a mirror house, and when he's there, he ends up getting abducted by the serial killer, or at least that's how it seems. And then the credits roll. So this episode, honestly, it had like one or two funny moments. It really did. I'm going to give it that. One or two funny moments. But other than that, the entire freaking episode was just a man-hating episode. It was very obviously written by a feminist. I don't know if it was a particular different writer on this one compared to the last ones, but ultimately, it's a man-hating episode, and it makes itself very well known. It has no reason to pull its punches because it wants you to know it hates men, and if you are a man watching this, they want you to know that they hate you. So anyway, guys, for this episode of Velma, episode number 7, I'm going to give this episode, again, another 1.5 out of 10. It's a number that I think is pretty safe for Velma right now. The show, if you like their animation, that's fine. I'm not really a fan of the animation personally. I know some people are. There's like one or two decent jokes in there every now and then that just scrape by barely as funny and passable, but everything else is just cringe. Everything else is ideologically based. It's obvious with the feminism stuff at this point. Every episode is dedicated to an ideology, in case you can't notice that. So I'm not a fan of it at all, obviously, and it's just going to continue to get worse, I'm pretty sure, as we get towards episode 8, 9, and 10. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.